Hello and welcome to Talking General Practice, the podcast from GP Online. I'm Emma Bauer, the editor of GP Online. Today on the podcast I'm speaking to GP Dr Farnaaz Sharief, who's also the Chief Executive of Manage Your Mind, which works with NHS and social care staff to help develop mental resilience. We're talking about mental wellbeing in the NHS, what mental resilience means and why it's so important. Farnaaz also has lots of practical advice on how people can boost their mental resilience to help them cope with stress and pressures, both inside and outside of work. She also talks about how we can best support friends and colleagues experiencing stress, what practices and organisations can do to promote wellbeing, and the role coaching can play in supporting people. This is such a fascinating conversation and I found a lot of Farnaaz's advice incredibly useful, so I hope you do too. If you want any further information about anything we've discussed here, there are some useful links in the notes for this episode. This episode of Talking General Practice has been supported by the General Medical Council. The GMC has recently updated Good Medical Practice, the professional standards for all doctors. Get to know how the changes will help to create respectful, fair and compassionate healthcare environments by visiting the GMC's website at gmc-uk.org. And there's a link directly to the updated Good Medical Practice in the notes for this episode. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast now Dr Farnaaz Sharief, who's a GP by background, an experienced medical director and chief executive of Manage Your Mind, an organisation that works with staff across health and social care to help them develop mental resilience. Farnaaz has over 20 years of experience working in both hospitals and primary care. Alongside her work on mental wellbeing and leadership roles in the NHS, she also mentors clinicians. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Farnaaz.
Thank you for having me, Emma. It's good to be here.
So I did a little brief introduction there, but can you explain a little bit about your background and your career up till now?
Yeah, so I work as a GP, and I really enjoy that sort of contact with patients. I've also had various sort of leadership positions in the NHS, varying from clinical lead roles to being on governing bodies back in CCG days. My most recent role was that of a place-based medical director, and I started that just before the pandemic hit. So it was a very steep learning curve, and something that taught me a lot, both personally and professionally. And I've got a real passion for mental health. I do a lot of yoga meditation myself, but I've also trained and I teach breath work, meditation, and I'm also a coach and a senior fellow with the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management.
We're actually here to talk about mental resilience and mental well-being. How is it that you became interested in well-being and mental health in the first place?
After I qualified, and I was a junior doctor, I actually qualified in Zimbabwe, and I had a really stressful transition from being a student to working and being responsible for making decisions about people's lives when it came to their health and well-being. It was really stressful for me, and I don't think I dealt with that transition very well. This friend of mine actually took me onto this program that was being run through a charity at the time, and I learned these breathing techniques. And what was really amazing about them was that I felt good while I did the program, but I felt a real benefit when I continued to practice these techniques after I'd completed the program. It didn't take me very long. It was about sort of 20 minutes a day. And I found that I was able to function a lot better during that transition in really, really high stress environments. And that really brought home to me how powerful our minds are. And when we can tap into ways in which we could sort of change our mindset and use some very practical, tangible things like our breath, it can really make a meaningful difference to how you operate in different environments.
You're the Chief Executive of Manage Your Mind. Why did you set up that organisation and what is it that you actually do?
When I was working as a GP partner, I started getting very frustrated because I only had 10 minutes with patients. And I found a lot of people that were coming in sort of had low-level mental health conditions. Some of them didn't need medication. Some of them were coming off medication and, they needed that sort of additional support. And I kept getting frustrated because I didn't have enough time to spend with them and talk to them about things that they could do to help themselves. Because I'd sort of trained through this charity on breath work, I sort of set up weekly sessions for the community. I ran it voluntarily for about 9 years. And it was an opportunity for me just to spend more time with people that needed that kind of guidance, needed that steer, and equip them with life skills that they could use and apply them to in managing their their own mental and emotional well-being. And it sort of snowballed into a CIC, Manage Your Mind, and that's now been running a number of years. And our focus at the moment is really to provide the same skills to health and social care professionals, particularly after the pandemic when we saw that there were a significant number experiencing burnout. As a GP, I work 3 sessions a week. The rest of the time, I do a bit of consulting as well. So, where there are teams that may have a particular challenge, or they want to develop a strategy, or they want to change their team dynamics, I do support them with that. Manage Your Mind is really rooted in breath work. So, I do Manage Your Mind breath work sessions with folks as well. And then I do one-to-one sessions in terms of coaching, an NLP practitioner as well. So if folks ever want to change their states, we have group sessions or workshops based on how you can understand your pattern of thinking to change your physiology. And it's such a lovely mix. The clinical side I spend with my patients, plus additional skills I have through coaching, through NLP, through breath work, just combining all of that for workshops for individuals I really love it. I love the combination.
The work you do is really based around resilience, and resilience is something that's been mentioned more and more in recent years in the NHS. It's now almost, an essential skill if you work in the NHS. I've always had a slight problem with the word resilience because it sort of implies that you need to adjust to learn to work in really difficult environments rather than, than the environments around people needing to change to be more supportive. But what does resilience mean for you?
So resilience, you're right. It means different things to different people. The sort of, I think it's the Oxford Dictionary definition of resilience. They define it as how an individual recovers from the challenges they face. But to me, resilience is about, yes, how you recover, but it's also about how you function as effectively as possible in whatever environment you're in. So it could be something to do with your personal life, it could be relationships, it could be how you're functioning when it comes to dealing with financial pressures, with professional pressures, your workplace, anything, but how you as an individual function with whatever stress is coming your way. I think that's how I define resilience.
So, how do you actually teach people to be more resilient? What do you focus on when you're working with people who work in the NHS, for example?
The first thing to probably say is that there are a lot of people that have come onto the programs that are already very resilient. And I think most people can probably relate to this, particularly in primary care. With the front line of the front line, primary care is very resilient. We saw that particularly during the pandemic, where we sort of stepped up and did a lot in terms of supporting our patients, particularly around vaccinations. But often what happens is when we work in very high stress, very volatile environments, there's relentless drive to make that difference can sometimes wear us out when we're dealing with a lot of challenges, one after the other, and we don't stop or take a break or look after ourselves. So with the folks that come onto our program, we recognize that people have been going for a very long period of time. They haven't stopped, they haven't taken a break. Often their sleep is affected because they're thinking so much about how to finish off all that they've got to do in terms of their workloads and things. People have challenges at home that they bring into work, or they have challenges at work that they bring back home with them. We develop personalized approaches for each individual, rooted in breath work, but also some practical principles that people can apply when they're dealing with their particular challenges. I think the unique thing about breath work is that you don't have to stop what you're doing to change the way in which you breathe to feel better. You literally, once you're equipped with this, you just change the way in which you breathe. It takes minutes, and that helps change your state of mind. It helps change your state, brings in that sort of focus, that clarity, and it puts people in a more responsive rather than a reactive state.
So, is most of the work things you do, is it based around breath work? Because that's something that everybody's got within them to be able to tap into, isn't it?
Exactly. They say that the secrets to the universe lie in the tip of your nose, which is in your breath. We use our breath all the time. If you think about it, you breathe differently when you're angry, you breathe differently when you're calm and relaxed and you're on holiday or sitting by the beach. At the end of a 12-hour shift, when you sit down for the first time, we all sigh, we breathe differently. When you're in pain, you breathe differently. So it's sort of reversing that principle. And instead of allowing the emotion to change the rhythm of your breath, you get there first and you change the rhythm of your breath so you can change your state of mind. And that obviously affects our physiology, that affects our state, and that allows us to function effectively in high stress environments.
You've talked a bit earlier about some of the, the problems and issues that people who come on your course with, if they're suffering from stress and burnout, all of that stuff, it must sort of have an impact on places where people work as well. And what sort of issues does it cause amongst teams?
Before the pandemic, there was a survey done by the BMA, and I think they found that there was a significant number of doctors who responded that were showing signs of burnout. I think it was 80% or over 80%. Then we had the pandemic, and following the pandemic, pressures across health and social care increased dramatically, right? So staff left, there were workforce shortages. Those that were left behind were working a lot harder, they were working a lot longer, there were funding pressures, and all of these things adversely affected people's wellness and contributed to increasing amounts of stress in the workplace. I think it was the King's Fund. They looked into this and they found that when teams aren't functioning as well as they do, or high levels of stress or shortages or burnout amongst individuals, that adversely starts to affect the quality of care that patients get, which in turn affects outcomes and experiences. So it's really important for us to get this right when it comes to looking after our workforce.
How do you recognise the signs of stress and burnout early? And then what should be the warning signs that you might need to do something about it?
It is really important to sort of spot the signs, being proactive in terms of spotting the signs in teams. And I think the way in which you can recognize if members are struggling is if you're looking for sort of uncharacteristic behavior. You might find that folks that are generally very productive suddenly become less productive. You might have colleagues, for example, that are looking really tired, maybe they're not eating. They might not be motivated to do the things that they usually do, or they might be taking a lot of time off work for various reasons, or they might not socialize as much as they do. In some cases, people also appear quite anxious or restless. In some cases as well, you might find that there's people that use smoking a lot more or perhaps drinking a lot more. And these are the high level things. If you spot them in people, I always say, ask them twice if they're okay. There was a survey actually, again, that was done by Time to Change UK, and they found that 3/4 of the UK population would say that they're fine, even if they were having a problem. So it is about spotting these signs, but when you do, and you ask someone how they're doing, ask them again if you're not sure.
If people are in those early stages of stress and burnout, I mean, people themselves, if anyone listening to this is as well, what can you do to kind of prevent it from getting worse? What would your advice to people be?
The first is to sort of speak up, to have the conversation in a sort of safe space. And it's often helpful to have a sort of well-being champion or a lead or perhaps a partner in an organization or a practice that's available and approachable so you can have that safe, confidential conversation with them. I think it's also about creating that open, compassionate culture in the workplace and leading by example to do that, right? So talk to people about how they are and what the issues are and be open and honest and raise awareness of that sort of well-being at work. And then where people do come up and talk to you about it, or if it is raised, then I think it's about ensuring that they're as well supported as possible. And there's different things, primary care networks and practices do. Sometimes they offer people flexible working, remote working. They make sure that you've got sort of adequate breaks that are built into, the working day or the working week. I've spoken to practices before where I've done resilience sessions and they take a 10 or a 15-minute walk at lunchtime just so you're getting some fresh air. There's some that have regular supplies of fruit rather than the unhealthy chocolates and biscuits and things. I mean, everyone loves a good chocolate. I do too. But when you're eating the right stuff, you get the right energy to do what you need to. Often the answers to this, like I say, resilience means different things to different people, and it can get complex. But if we start by doing the simple things, that can make a big difference. So take the breaks when you need it, make sure you're well hydrated, eating the right food. And then for those that do need it, we can signpost them to counseling services. We've got practitioner health. There's coaching opportunities available for folks in the NHS. And then programs like Manage Your Mind, they may be sort of scattered across the country that you can invest in for your staff.
Do you think it is worth practices investing in resilience programs for people? Do you think it's something that their staff would appreciate?
I think so. I mean, I think certainly the ones that I've delivered for primary care networks and, sort of larger organizations, we've had really good feedback. I think when you're equipping people with a life skill that they can use at work, but also a life skill that they can use if they've got a challenging relationship or other sort of personal problems, then that's usually pretty well received. Something that's easily integrated, they can embed it in their lives. And when you use things like breath work, you could literally just use it whenever you want to. As long as you've got that skill, that ability, that awareness to tap into it and use it when you need to, then yeah. It's also simple things like standing up during the day. There's been studies, I think, that have been done that show that if you spend less time sitting when you're at work, your psychological and physiological health improves. It's often small and simple things that can make the biggest difference.
What are sort of practical advice and tips that you could give people that they could do to promote well-being on a sort of day-to-day basis? What's a good place to start?
Well, there's lots and lots of different things to do, but I think maybe just as a starter for 10, one of the things to think about is the quality of the first hour of your morning and the quality of the last hour of your evening. We've all got 24 hours in the day, right? Nobody's got more, nobody's got less. The challenge I think some of us have is we would love to get it right for those 24 hours and have a good 24 hours. But it's impossible to get it right the whole time.
Yes.
If we forget about the 24 hours just for a bit and focus on improving the quality of the first hour of your day, then the quality of the rest of your day improves. You know how when you get out of bed on the wrong side, the rest of your day just follows that sort of theme. But if you change the quality of your morning and you're getting up, you're less rushed, you've got quality time to spend with your kids, for example, a little cuddle before everyone jumps out of bed to sort of get ready for the day, or that's a good time to go for a run, to meditate. Do something that fulfills you. And for some people, it's just having a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise, or taking a walk in the garden, or just having just some time for themselves. So improving the quality of the first hour of your morning is likely to affect the quality of the rest of your day. And similarly, changing the quality of the last hour of your evening changes the quality of your sleep. I'm sure we can all relate to going to bed on an argument, right? It just plays on your mind. It affects the way you sleep. Or folks sometimes have habit of scrolling on social media or checking emails literally just before they go to bed. And if we sort of stop stimulating the mind in that way before you want to rest it, making sure that your sleeping environment is unstimulated, it's dark, it's cool. And if you're doing something, perhaps light meditation, 5 or 10 minutes just before you go to bed, some breath work, a hot bath if you can, or something that just allows your mind that's been going at 100 miles per hour during the day to just get to sort of 80, 70, 60, 50 miles before you slow down completely and rest, is you'll find really changes the quality of your sleep. And I think if we can master that, then you'll find the quality of the day improves, the quality of your sleep improves, and both of these then add to the energy you've got to deal with when it comes to what you've got to face at work or personal lives.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Sleep is so important to mental well-being, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's a really good breath. It's called the straw breath. I'll send you a link to it perhaps and can use it. It's a really, really easy breath to do, or box breathing that you can do at night before you go to bed. You can lie. It's always better to do breathing sitting up, but sometimes if you're wanting to get to sleep, if you're lying on your back, do a bit of box breathing. It just relaxes the mind and really helps you fall to sleep a lot easier.
Most people also probably feel they have little control over their working environment, particularly when you're in the NHS. But are there things people can do in their day-to-day working environment that would make things maybe just a little bit easier?
When it comes to control, it can be quite tricky. And often people find they get frustrated when they focus on things that they can't control. Key thing, if there's a principle to follow here, is if you focus on the things you can control and achieve them, even if they are small and simple things, that sense of achievement really helps you deal with the more complex issues. We were talking about standing earlier on. I've had lots of GPs on these resilience sessions, and we all have, most people actually have JX boards in their surgery. So you push a button and your patient comes in. But if you stop using that, for example, and if you were to get up and go out to your waiting room, call your patient, get your steps up, change your state, change your physiology, things like that, simple things like that make a huge difference. Making sure you're well hydrated, at least 2 liters of water a day. So if you've got one of those big bottles with the markings on it, have that. Keep yourself hydrated during the day. Eat the right stuff. We talked about fruit earlier on instead of chocolates, walks at lunchtime. And a really important thing for people that do virtual working is to allow themselves to have breaks during meetings, at least a 15-minute break, so you allow your brain to reset. It's so hard when you go from back to back to back to back, because it just decreases your ability to focus and to engage, with the conversation that you have. So breaks during meetings is really, really important as well. There's a really good thing that I do is every 20 minutes, look at something that is 20 feet away for 20 seconds. It's challenging because there is so much that needs to be done, and people are so passionate about getting the work done. Sometimes it's hard to end the conversation, but I think if you set that expectation at the beginning of a meeting, with folks, especially if you're chairing it or have a word with the chair, and just sort of say, look, we've got an hour for this conversation. It would be great if we could aim to finish 10 minutes early so we've got a break before we head on to the next one. I think most people would find it a welcome relief.
Definitely. You do a lot of coaching as well. Is coaching something that could help GPs and others in general practice? And if so, how do you think it could help them?
To me, coaching is about having a space where you are away from the challenges of the working environment and whatever's happening in your personal life. It's a safe space, it's confidential, and you've got an opportunity to have, a really deep and meaningful conversation with someone that you trust. And usually the relationship that you build with your coach is a really trusted relationship where you can sort of talk about the things that are very sort of important to you. What I find in coaching is that a principle that you cannot not communicate. And I find in my coaching sessions that often if people are upset by something or disturbed by something, a lot of qualified or experienced coaches can pick up on that through their body language, or they can understand that there's something deeper, something below the iceberg that's affecting an individual just by having a conversation with them. And to sort of bring that up to the surface in a very respectful way, and to support people in addressing these kinds of issues, I think is very, very powerful. That the time that people take to invest in coaching, you come away with these insights that can really change the way you think about the problems that you have. So I would, 100% recommend it. It really is a very powerful, life-changing experience. I know when I've had a coach, having conversations with my coach has really changed a lot for me. It changes my perspective on the way in which I look at my problems, and that helps me deal with them a lot better.
So those coaching skills you've got, that must be really useful in consultations with patients as a GP as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely useful in consultations with patients, but also across the NHS. When I was working as medical director and I was having sometimes some really tough conversations with clinical directors and other executives, I think having the coaching skills under my belt and knowing how to sort of steer the conversation so that, we're really touching on the root causes of the problems that we have was super useful. It boils down to how we do the job. We've got the skill, we've got the expertise, we know what to do in our jobs. But I think the benefit of coaching, stepping back, of investing in yourself, how we have some of the difficult conversations, how we talk to our partners, how we talk to family members, how we talk to our staff, our teams, that really is fine-tuned when you're able to sort of step back, take a simple few but very powerful deep breaths, and there's so many different techniques you can use for that, and apply principles to really enrich the conversations that you have.
I was talking to a GP the other day, actually, and it's a really difficult time in general practice at the minute. So they've done a lot of work around building well-being into what they do in terms of trying to foster a better team spirit and things like that. Do you think that sort of stuff can help even in the face of the problems we've got?
We could all do with more funding in primary care. Of course we could. We could definitely do with systemic change across the NHS. Absolutely. But, whilst that is a work in progress, there are things that we can do for ourselves. When we are functioning better, when we're thinking clearly, when we're focused, then that clarity, that focus, that energy helps us drive the change, drive the transformation that we want. And I always find that the first step in any transformation program, whether you're looking at a patient pathway, a clinical pathway, whether you're looking to redesign a whole system, I think the first step in any of that is clarity of mind. It's focus. It's making sure you're in a high energy state so that you can do what needs to be done. Because if you're tired, if you haven't slept, and if you haven't slept for ages, and if you've been tired for a very long time, then that affects the way in which we have these kinds of conversations and we drive transformation. And that also affects the outputs. So I think the first step is look after yourself. And when you feel good, you can look after the people around you. And that's how it sort of spreads.
That is such good advice.
There's a really beautiful quote that I love. Life is 10% what the world hands you and 90% how you deal with it. And our ability to deal with what the world hands us is our personal resilience. And I think the one thing for sure, once you invest in yourself, nobody can take that away from you. You can lose your job, your house, your car, you can lose all of that. But your investment in yourself, in your mental and emotional well-being, nobody can touch that. And I think that's why it is so, so powerful and so important to do.
That's great. That's a brilliant place to leave it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Farnaaz. That was really brilliant.
Thanks for having me. And it's great for us to be able to have this really enriching conversation. And I really hope it makes a difference to those who need it.
Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, and thanks so much to Farnaaz for taking the time to talk with me. As I mentioned earlier, there's some really useful links to some of the subjects she talked about, including those breathing techniques, in the notes for this episode. There's also a link to a webinar on wellbeing that Farnaaz presented on our sister site, MIMS Learning. I'll be back next week for our regular news review. In the meantime, don't forget you can keep up to date with all the latest news and access a host of other resources on our website at GPonline.com.